The extreme temperatures can turn prison cells into death chambers. According to the Texas Tribune, nearly 70% of the prisons in Texas do not have air conditioning. The state of Texas has a budget surplus of nearly $33 billion. Advocates pushing to spend some of that money to fix the prison system held a rally today at the state capitol. It's part of their 85 to Keep Them Alive campaign to create regulations to forbid temperatures above 85 degrees to ever exist inside of prisons.
If you had a wall that was facing west, you'd get it the worst. I mean, like right now, you get it the worst because you got that hot wall. And there's no air conditioning and there's no, what do you call it, insulation. It's just concrete, you know. So that back wall, you can literally, I mean, you can burn up. But I mean, I've had burn marks where I've fallen asleep and I've had my back on the wall. And then 3 or 4 days later, they're like, hey, man, you got a patch on your back. It looks like a sunburn. And you know, it'd get that hot. I mean, we wouldn't feel it because it'd be so miserable. We'd pass out from the heat.
Our next guest has dedicated much of her life to bringing attention to the problem with the prison system in Texas and across the country. Loen Kelley is the founder of Prison Writers. Her organization helps those who are living behind bars share their story. Loen, good to see you. What's going on in Texas? Help us understand how people are living under such extraordinarily awful conditions.
You know, honestly, I don't think any of us can understand it. If you take the temperature outside, which we all know has been, you know, at least over 100, it's warmer, hotter in the prisons themselves. I'm getting reports of anywhere from 105 consistently every day to up to 120. It's what they've done is they have a few things that they are sort of pitching that is placating, trying to placate the advocates, that are new things they've implemented, and they're really kind of ridiculous. One is that everybody can have a fan, which is interesting because a lot of places they have to pay for it themselves, which isn't easy. They're supposed to have ice that they deliver every hour, every half hour to the inmates, and there's all sorts of stories around there that that the ice is melted by the time it gets to them. It's run out. It doesn't come that often. The showers, they're supposed to have like a designated cold showers. That's not happening either. But the big thing is that they're sort of banking on is that they have these respite areas, but they're the air conditioned small room in the prison, maybe the day room, maybe an infirmary, extra room, and they are small. They're air conditioned. The idea is that you can go in there and get a break, but they're so crowded, and you have sort of such a short limit of time, and then you're just thrust back into the prison, which is like you've heard it a million times. It's like an oven. But, they've described it as like a hairdryer blowing on you. And so
that's the concern for me about the fans. It's like, look, if it's 105 degrees or 110 degrees outside and I'm inside with no ventilation, often not even windows, and you blow hot air through a fan around, the fan ain't going to make me feel better. I'm just blowing the hot air around. It makes no sense to me. This idea of a fan also often requires money. You pointed that out. Not everyone has access to money, and I shouldn't need money to not die. I shouldn't need money to have basic rights. I mean, all of us in the United States, all of us, as a matter of constitutional rights, not to mention international law, have a right to not be subjected to cruel and unusual punishment. I mean, or torture. I mean, to me, if you're inside of basically a sardine can with hot air blowing, that's torture.
I mean, it really is. And the methods for alleviation are so minimal. Like they take their sheets and they stuff it down the toilet to get it all wet. And then they either drape it up on so that it collects the heat, they think. They have, 30 minutes before it gets wet and they do all this again, or they put it over themselves. And, but if they get a cold shower, they say that they're starting to sweat before they even get out of the shower. I mean, even before they dry off, they're, the conditions are just truly impossible to understand. And the other thing that's happening is It's all because the real trouble is all because they're understaffed too. And so these guards, by the way, who are suffering, and I think it's important to point that out because I think that's going to help people get motivated to do something faster than it is to hear that prisoners are suffering. But these guards are walking around in full uniforms versus the inmates get to at least, cover themselves with wet towels while they're wearing their boxer shorts or they're lying on the ground naked, whatever it is. But these guards are walking around in often long sleeve shirts, lots of equipment, lots of protective equipment. And they're, getting paid very minimal amount of money, and they just can't find guards, people willing to do the job. So these guys are stuck in their cells because there's not as much movement because there's nobody to sort of facilitate that.
It's interesting that you say people might be more responsive to correctional officers being in deplorable conditions than prisoners. I think you're right. There's very little sympathy for prisoners. We've seen that since the beginning of time, but certainly in recent decades when we talk about food access, when we talk about safety from sexual assault, when we talk about lack of access to basic needs and resources, people often say, yeah, well, they're prisoners. What do you expect? It's unfortunate, but it seems like we don't have an appetite in this country to be responsive to the pain or the injustices that happen to people who are behind bars.
I mean, I think it's going to take people really dying. And the problem with that is that, people have been, dying, as they do in prison, for all sorts of reasons. But they, as I'm sure you've sort of read, that the theory is that they will say maybe this prisoner was doing drugs, so that it might have been related to that.
That's exactly right. I want to point that out for the audience, right? Since the heat wave began, at least 9 prisoners have died. They've said it's an unknown cause. They've said it's a heart attack. But what they don't say is that it's because of the heat. In fact, it's been 11 years since the state last classified a prison death as heat-related. This feels suspect to me. The state has no motivation to admit it because then it'd be admitting that they're killing people.
Exactly. And the only proof they have for the prisoners' point of view who are, trying to keep track of this, they'll, every day there's, like one guy told me, there's 10 guys who go to the infirmary every day. And, a lot of them don't come back, but they don't say they died. They just say they're in the infirmary. I did talk to somebody about an hour ago who said a woman died of heat-related things and it was in a woman's prison of all things. She happened to be in an air conditioning unit, but the next door prison apparently this woman had just died. But yeah, until there's deaths, really until there's serious illnesses from the guards, that there will probably be very little done because, even though they've passed in the House in Texas some bill to, I guess bring it down to 85 degrees, that, they can't get that through the Senate, even though they have this big surplus. So it's
right, because it's not about money. It's never been about money. And the fact that we're fighting to bring temperature down to 85 degrees when most of us lose our minds if our house were 85 degrees tells you just what we think about the incarcerated and the vulnerable in general in this country. Anyway, Loen, founder of Prison Writers. Her name is Loen Kelley. I want to thank you so much for joining me and for your important work on this matter.